many participants on a Saturday. It's really nice. My name is Joanne Ho, and I'm currently on the board of Contemporary Asian Theater Scene, which is also known as CATS. The program today is made possible by generous donations from our sponsors, Friends of CATS, California Arts Council, and AARP. It is my pleasure to present to you Wisp of a Woman, Poems from the Heart, featuring artist, poet, and educator Flo Oy Wong. In today's program, we're going to start with a From the Heart conversation with Flo, followed by her own poetry reading, and then we'll have a Q&A session. If you have any comments or questions that you want to ask Flo throughout the program, you can type it into the chat at the bottom of the Zoom or the Q&A box at the bottom of Zoom. Or if you're joining us on Facebook, feel free to type in the comments, and we'll be monitoring those, and we'll get to those questions and comments during the program. So to start off, I asked Flo how she would like to be introduced today. And, she simply stated that she wants people to know that she is an example of someone who started something new at age 75. Prior to that, she was a school teacher and an award-winning virtual artist. And then at age 75, she started her poetry career. So instead of retiring, she started something completely new, and it was very brave of her to do that. She said, as an elder, she's not going away. She still has a lot of things to say and a lot of things that she wants to give back to the community. So thank you, Flo, for not retiring. I think we'll all be better for that. So at this time, I'm going to introduce Leanne Lamb. She is our executive director at CATS, and she will have a thoughtful conversation with our woman of the hour, Flo Oy Wong.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Joanne. Really appreciate the introduction, and apologies for the momentary glip on audio, but we fixed it, so all good. It is very exciting for us to be with you during Women's History Month, and especially wonderful to bring Flo on because she's been a friend of CATS for years. I think almost at the beginning of the inception of CATS, which was about over 20 years ago. And she was a dear friend of our founder, Dr. Jerry Hira. It is an honor for us to hear Flo and her poetry today. And before we get started, I'd like to have a brief discussion with Flo to understand where we are with life. And Flo has a very interesting way of describing life that touches me. It touches me viscerally and reaches many of you, I'm sure, as well. Flo, welcome to the program. Thank you so much for spending your afternoon with us. And I think we're going to take you off mute. I think you need to do that on your side.
Okay.
Excellent.
Good.
Welcome to the program, Flo.
Oh, I'm happy to be here.
This is wonderful. This is especially important. And we've been talking and planning this program. And I tell you, every moment we spend preparing, it's a treasure because I gain so much wisdom and insight from you, and you're able to describe things in a way that I think not only myself, but other people can understand life. That's what art is all about. So thank you.
You're welcome.
Flo, you've been an artist for about 40 years, and I'm wondering, how your art has changed and how it's evolved over that time frame.
Well, my art, I still show at museums and galleries, but my art now is actually poetry. So I went from visual to literate. But while I was doing my visual art, I was including words and then the alphabet and everything else. So pretty soon the words just sort of took over. And that's wonderful because I have been aware of poetry since I was 9. I flirted with the idea of being a poet and calling myself a poet in between 9 and 83, which is what I am now. And so finally, when I had my 75th birthday, I said, okay, it's time to jump in. And and I started. And I'm really inspired by my sister Nellie, and I'm inspired by Jenny Lim. So I just said, okay, I'll just follow what they do.
Excellent. About 10 years ago, there was a program that KQED put on called Spark, and it featured prominent artists from throughout the Bay Area. And that was such an important segment because, you know, as an Asian American artist, as a woman, it was prominent, and it was a beautiful feature of your, I believe, your rice sack work. Can you tell us a little bit about that and where it started?
What happened was that I was invited to show at the Japanese American Museum in San Jose. And so it was tied in with that. And somebody in San Francisco nominated me for the Spark program. And so Spark representatives called. And so when I talked to the person, he says, well, this is not a guarantee that you're on. I have to come and interview you and see if you will belong and give us a story. And so he came, parked his car across the street. His wife stayed in the car. He came to see me, and we had an interview. And apparently, I passed the interview, you know, because I was selected. And I'm really grateful for that. And I'm just grateful for people making recommendations. It was an eye-opening experience to work with the members of the Japanese American Museum in San Jose. And eventually I found a closet full of internment camp suitcases. So I made the show based on that. And it was just an amazing, amazing event. The collaboration was just sweet. Hard work, but sweet.
It was, I think there was a segment where you're working with Jimmy Yamaichi and doing an actual representation of a barrack in Japanese internment camp. And to this day, when I see a suitcase in my own family, I actually have two, one in my living room that I just think of you every time I go in, because it represents so much and what your ancestors have brought forth.
Oh, thank you. What happened was that I was at a meeting with the planning committee of JAMsj. And so I just began to ask questions and things. And I happened to get up to go to the restroom. And I opened the wrong door, you know, because I didn't know my way around JAM. And I saw these suitcases, floor to ceiling, and they were all crunched up. So I went back to the table where we were meeting, and I said, tell me about those suitcases in the closet. They said, oh, they're from the internment. And I said, can I use them? And they said, yes. And that was the beginning of the visual idea to talk about what people carried to camp. And, you know, of course, I had learned then that they could only put in what they could carry. They couldn't take extra things. So it became very poignant, very poignant.
Oh, the artist, I mean, that it takes a lot of sensibility for you as an artist to work with what you have or what you might see. Can you talk about how your artist sensibility has evolved over your years?
Yes, I started out in a general way with an art education so that, you know, I learned about the masters, and, you know, like I knew Brock, Picasso, and all of that. And then because I'm a feminist, I also learned about women's work, you know, Mary Cassatt and other women artists. And then I went, oh, you know, this is really interesting. So one day at my house, I had a drawing workshop for some friends and myself, and we hired a nude model. And so it was about 1 or 2 o'clock, and the model was still posing in my living room. And my son comes back from high school. He gets embarrassed that he walked in on this. He didn't know that I was having this drawing class. And then the model just threw on her robe right away. And I went, oh, okay, I just better figure out what's going on. And so then my partners didn't want to pay the fee for hiring the model. So I said, I need human bodies. Where can I find human bodies? So I opened my photo album, and there are human bodies, but they're clothed, and they are my family. So I started from there to examine the human body, but because they were clothed, I couldn't examine them physically, but I could examine them from memory.
Wonderful. You know, Flo, one thing about your background is that I don't know if you regard yourself as, well, I definitely have seen, you know, you are an activist, and that is so important in your and what you can impact and what you say and how you say it. Could you talk about your activist elements within your work?
Well, I wanted to be a quiet suburban housewife when we moved here in 1961 after we got married. Then we had our children, and I wanted just to be, a stay-at-home mom to help my kids, even though, I had my degree in English and I was already a teacher. And so what happened was that there were two things that happened. One happened to my daughter, Felicia. There was a sexual trauma experience when she was a sixth grade student at the elementary school. And my son had another problem surface at Homestead High School, where the whites at the school said they knew more about being Chinese or Asian than Asians. And that was represented by one of the school teachers. So those were the moments that I dipped my toe into becoming activist. I have opinions, but I used to keep them quiet and into myself. But when I saw what was happening to my daughter, I saw what was happening to my son, I couldn't be quiet any longer. So, I just became a warrior right away.
Well, I have to say that the work that you've done, even for your family, from using RISACs as your medium, and how you've done work in art and engraving them and writing words for your family, for Wenho Lee, for people in the community, is just inspiring.
Well, my thought is that all of us, white people, people of color, and especially Asian Americans, we belong at the American table of culture. And I didn't see too many of us. And that made me really sad. Why were we being erased when all of us in our different ways as immigrants and daughters or children of immigrants, why aren't our accomplishments accepted and respected and everything else? So that's my goal, is to just tell people, if they're creative, and if you're a person of color, and especially you're Asian American, do it, say it, and just keep at it. Just be a good pest. I was a good pest. If they refused me one time, I just did it again. If they refused me another time, I did it again. And that happened when I nominated the late Bernice Bing for an award with the NWCA. They have a Lifetime Achievement Award, but they were East Coast focused. And they didn't know about people too much from California and the West Coast. So I nominated her 3 times, and she finally got it on her 3rd time. Why? Because my dear, good late friend Moira Roth said yes, that Bernice was a valid nominee. And I was highly insulted, not because they didn't come back to me, but to think that someone like us, who make art all the time, and meaningful art, not art that just is done on Sundays, that we didn't have that respect. So again, I became a woman warrior, and I eventually presented Bernice at a big event at some East Coast university. And she was rewarded. And she's going to have a show at the Asian Museum in San Francisco in July. So everybody save August 13th. Come to the opening.
Excellent. What I have seen is how you ensure that you save and you bring stories forth for those who are not able to bring them themselves.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Yeah. We all have stories, but we don't all have the experience or the confidence or the courage to do it. Because we think that when we tell our stories, no matter what shape they are, when we tell them that the earth is going to open up and swallow us up, the earth doesn't open up to swallow us up. Instead, when we tell our stories, we get support. So I was showing a piece about my father, who was shot by a relative when I was 1.5 years. And my parents kept the story secret, but somehow the secret leaked out to us and all of that. And so when I decided to tell the story of my father, I decided to tell his story and my mother's story. Now, for 4 years, I sewed on the piece. I sewed rice sack to rice sack to rice sack. And I didn't know what I was doing. The purpose didn't come to me. All I was doing was sewing rice sacks. And then, pow, one day I had an epiphany that I was retrieving the story of my father's shooting. And with that focus and with, I was patient. The sewing was meditative. It just gave me peace, brought me calm. And so then now it is a piece that is 14 feet high by 38 feet wide. And it is in the collection of the San Jose Quilt and Textile Museum in San Jose. So, and I spent 18 years working on that piece. Because every time someone told me a story about my father, another story came. So I included a lot of the stories. And then my blessing for that piece is that Moira Roth and Hong Lu both came to my studio to bless it because I was so scared. I was letting out a family secret. We knew our father was shot. And by the way, he survived, he didn't die. So we knew that our father was shot. We could talk about it, but we couldn't tell anybody else. And here I was outing my dad's story. And my mother's in heaven. I think she's happy.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. I really appreciate seeing your poetry and seeing, I can see that it becomes an iterative cycle. You have one date and you might be adding another point another time. And so I can see how your art evolves.
Yeah, it does. For us as human beings, it's very important for us to be in the present moment. So when I make the art, especially about family stories, it's in the past. But as I'm sewing, as I'm working, as I'm printing, as I'm painting, things happen. And so the reason I found out more about the story is because I called my older sister, the late Lai King Wong, and asked her a question. And she happened to run into the man who helped my mother stop the shooter on the streets of Chinatown. I mean, talk about serendipity. So she asked him, and he says, oh, she gave him my phone number. She says, oh, tell Flo about it, because she's making an art piece about it. So it was Chinese New Year. So he sent me information, and I said, well, tomorrow's going to be the Lunar New Year, and we're not supposed to talk about bad things. Shall we skip it? He said, nah, call me, let's talk. So on that Chinese New Year or Lunar New Year of that year, I got more answers to my father's shooting than I realized. It was just amazing to uncover information in that informal way. I didn't go to a library. I didn't look up old videos or something else. I didn't read a lot of books. It came from the man who helped my mother capture the person who shot my dad.
Wow. Flo, I want to give you time to share your poetry. And before we do that, I was interested in hearing how you begin your day as a poet. Can you share that?
Yeah. When I wake up in the morning, I lay in bed. I listen to a meditation after I soak my eyes just to wake up. And then I listen to the meditation. When I finish the meditation, I send a text to a friend of mine who turned 90. And for her gift, I'm writing her a text for 90 days to help her celebrate. And then what I do is I put in my earbuds and I listen to the Poetry Foundation. I listen to poems a day, and sometimes I read my own poems. And sometimes I'm even writing a new poem. And so poetry is part of my morning routine, either as a generator of poems or a receiver of poems. And it puts me in a good place, because I'm meeting my needs immediately. Then when I get out of bed, I can meet the needs of others, and in this case, it's my husband or whatever else.
That's beautiful. Flo, thank you so much for sharing your poetry with us.
Oh, I'm happy to do so. And thank you for the invitation. So Is it time for me to read?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. So before I start my reading, I have several people to thank. I want to thank my husband, Ed, who has seen me through 60 years of making art and writing poetry. When I get really busy, he takes over all the household duties and more, and the grocery shopping. And it just allows me the time to give growth to my creative side. And then I want to thank the Cupertino Poet Laureate Program, because that's where I went at the age of 75 to learn how to write poems, to learn about poems, to be with poets. And I love communities of creative people. And so, and I think Jing Yang might be one of the viewers or the participants today. She's the current poet laureate of Cupertino. I'm going to read some poems, and I'm going to read 2 poems from my book, Dreaming of Glistening Pomelos, that you can get on Amazon. I published this at the age of 80. So the first poem I'm going to read is called House of Fiery Daughters. When silence is louder than thunderous drums of the Lunar New Year, a time when prancing dragons joyously spit out green lettuce symbols symbolic of money, when firecrackers explode the heart of Webster Street, I run after the festive cacophony, remembering Baba and Mama's long ago ancestral homeland, a place where rice stalks swayed in monsoon flooded fields. Howling winds swept into Baba's ancient abode that could no longer house them. After coming to our new country, my Baba and Mama resided in a house of fiery daughters until they birthed a son. I had gone to China 4 times in a 10-year period, and the latter 2 in 2004 and 2005. I was able to go with my husband to his village and also his ancestral village, and we went to my ancestral village. And the blessing in that trip is that both of my older sisters who were born there were on the trip to provide memories on site. It was just an amazing trip. My second poem is called Back When Heaven Was Just a Whisper, and it's influenced by poet Rita Dove. Back when heaven was just a whisper, when my immigrant family was growing, back when my parents thirsted for chromosomal seeds to birth their wanted son, I was born. Back when autumnal winds wrapped the land, I cried keen sounds, bundled in starving cloth of rainbow hues, crimson signifying good fortune. Life beckoned and I answered. Dancing with waving arms, slender piano fingers, catching my breath in diaphanous webs of sisters, I swooned in the hand-me-down crib. Inhaling my sister's love, I was soft and harsh. Back when my parents still desperately wanted their son, my tendrils started to spread, and I tapped the sun's energy to eventually beam between shimmering moon and stars. I come from a family of 6 sisters, including me and my brother. And it was a fascinating upbringing for me for the simple reason there was the preference for my brother because it was a boy. And that provided me with a lot of issues to work with. And there was some suffering, but the suffering is gone because I've come to terms with the traditional structure of the traditional Chinese American family. I now turn to 2 poems about my late sister, Lai Webster. I miss her. I miss her. I miss her. I miss her. So the first poem is called A Wisp of a Woman, and Lai for me was a wisp of a woman. Several years ago, our niece Allison Chop Lai's daughter invited us to stay in her new home in Auburn that she shares with her partner. And so we went, and it happened to be the time when Marysville has the big festival for the Lunar New Year. And so we're at a parade. So I'm describing my sister Lai, frail, gaunt, pushing her red walker into watching the parade, a wisp of a woman. At a corner in a small town sardine with revelers waiting for the parade to begin, stands a wisp of a woman in her late 80s. Her strands of snowy hair fluttering in the frigid wind. She wears dark glasses, which slip down her once perky nose. Black and blue blotches caused by a recent fall are noticeable. With gnarled fingers that once knitted socks and sweaters, she grips the metallic handles of her walker. Her slight body is chilled on the windblown day. Before long, a shrill whistle blows, signaling the start of the parade held in honor of early Chinese pioneers who lived in the small town long ago, when the still standing ancient temple offered a sacred site for them to pray to distant ancestors. Now, years later, drum majors spin batons, drill teams wave multicolored flags, high school bands march left, right, left, right, left, right. Boys and girls blow on horns. On the floats, girls in their teens are dressed in shimmering gowns, wearing glowing tiaras atop their newly coiffed hair, every tress in place. The wisp of a woman stares intensely, tapping a knobbly finger on her walker in tune with the music. Near the end of the parade, she hears dong dong chang, booming drum beats, threads of vibrations, reminding her of long ago Oakland Chinatown sounds during Lunar New Year. As the approaching Gimlung, Golden Dragon comes closer in the parade, the wisp of a woman finally sees red, gold, green details on the paper mache mystical creature, which is prancing, twirling, and swirling. As the dragon lifts and falls, it fills an entire block. Viewers, including the wisp of a woman, snuggle together. They ooh and ah, some snapping cell phone photos as smoky firecrackers explode, crackle, and shatter. The dragon energizes the crowd, including the wisp of a woman. She is suddenly transported far from the parade to the moment many years ago when the Gimlung, Golden Dragon, gyrated in front of our family's restaurant with the coffee cup neon sign. And the Chinese words that you hear I use, they are Hoisanhua, which is the ancestral dialect or language that my parents spoke and that we speak. So here's another poem about my sister Lai. She lives a few blocks away from me. So as she was dying and just sadly, physically deteriorating, I've been over to see her quite often. So she was a fan of Asian Asian dramas, Chinese, Japanese, whatever. And in the focus of Asian dramas are love triangles. There's always two women loved by one guy, or one guy, two guys loving whatever. And Lai was married twice. And so you'll hear the name of her first husband, Alan, and you'll hear the name of her second husband, Danny. So she was in a love triangle. A love triangle. A few days ago, my sister in hospice called. Come visit me, she requested in a scratchy voice. Her daughter repeated, Mom wants you to come over. Later, in my sister's bedroom, we chatted. I want to have lunch with you and Mara tomorrow, she said. Her sisterly authority was in full bloom. You buy the food, I will pay. I nodded, no longer disagreeing with her. Soon it was time to go. I waved and headed towards her bedroom door. Having something else to say, I returned to her bedside. You know, I said, when you get to heaven, you're going to be in a love triangle. Love triangle, she, an Asian drama fan, repeated in wide-eyed wonder. In most Korean and Chinese dramas, love triangles are the focus of the narrative. I continued, you're going to see Alan, her first husband, who has been waiting patiently for you. Then there's Danny, her second husband. He's also waiting. Who are you going to be with when you get to heaven? She unexpectedly broke into her winning smile. In unison, we erupted in laughter. We laughed and laughed. In a jovial mood, she flicked her hand slowly, her signal for my departure. I left with warmth from both of our hearts. 3 days later, she passed. From the beautiful stories of family and siblings, I now enter into the section of the presentation where I address anti-Asian violence. So when Trump was inaugurated that year, my husband and I went to a nearby street corner to protest. And this is what happened to me and my husband when we were there. Hometown racist. She crosses the street when the signal turns green. She reaches the protesters with signs held high. Her face is red. Her head and neck sink into her body. Speak English, she yells. Go back to your country. It is the day of the new president. I was so upset when that happened to both Ed and me. I became speechless, and I'm very seldom speechless. Ed just blew himself up like he was a big bear, and he just perched his mouth and he stuck his finger and he said, and both of us couldn't say what we needed to say. So I came home and I said, I need to say something. So I wrote this poem. Then I sent it to the city councils of the whole South Bay, almost the whole South Bay. And I only got one response. And that was from the mayor of Sunnyvale, who said that he drove up and down the street and he didn't see any problem. He did not answer what I asked him. Like, what is he going to do about racism rising in our city? And later on, he ran for re-election. He came to my doorbell. I opened the door and I finally recognized him. And he said, will you vote for me? I said, no, I'm not going to vote for you. And he said, well, why not? I said, I contacted you a few years ago when I needed help. And you didn't even address my question. You just told me that you drove up and down El Camino, and everything was okay. And I said, it wasn't okay. My husband and I were harassed. He had no answers for me. So in this poem, which is called It Is 2021, I insert the poem of Woody Guthrie, This Land Is Your Land. It is 2021. During the COVID pandemic, an explosive time of rising anti-Asian violence in America, Asians are attacked and killed. This land is your land, this land is my land, from California to the New York Island. In open Chinatown, a 91-year-old man is violently shoved to the ground from behind. A few minutes later, the attacker then pushes a 60-year-old man and a 55-year-old woman onto the sidewalk. From the redwood forest to the Gulf Stream water, this land was made for you and me. In New York, a 65-year-old Asian woman, battered by a man on the street, collapses in front of an apartment building. The perpetrator, a man who killed his mother in 2002, stomps on the 65-year-old woman repeatedly. Doormen shut the door to the apartment building. They do nothing to stop the stomper. As I went walking that ribbon of highway, I saw above me that endless skyway, saw below me that golden valley. This land was made for you and me. In Atlanta, 6 Asian women are shot by a white man who could not control his sex addiction. Blood flowing from the women's lifeless bodies floods the spa floor. I roamed and rambled, and I followed my footsteps to the sparkling sands of her diamond desert. All around me, a voice was sounding. This land was made for you and me. The poem I'm now about to read is Zachary. It's the one that is on the website of Cats. Zachary, when I saw him at the school ground behind my house, just was adorable. And I just watched him, just fool around and everything else. And so this is an abecedarian poem. It is a poem that is written with the alphabet in mind. So I start with A, and then I go to B, and then of course I ended with Z. A boy, Zachary by name, comes into the schoolyard with his dad who walks their dog. Their dad expecting perhaps to stay. Feeling free, Zachary dashes through the gate, running onto the sidewalk, hurtling his 2 years, 8-month body into his idea of their morning walk. Just then, Zachary turns to say, "Hi," kindly looking at me. Morning sounds float in our neighborhood school ground. Hums overpressed of fallen leaves. People like Zachary, his dad, and me quickly connect briefly, reassuring us that during COVID time, neighbors still greet one another while under clear azure sky, while vulnerable to COVID and variants. And still, however, xenophobia rises because of COVID. Young to elder, Chinese Americans' zest for life, hacked by racist fear. One of the things that I do after I get up and after I have brought poetry into my life while I'm in bed, I go for walks. And I love going for walks because it's great for my well-being and for my health. But I like going for walks because being outside inspires me to write poems about nature. These 3 poems about nature includes the monarch butterfly. A neighbor of mine introduced me to the declining population of monarch butterflies. And so I just became, just obsessed with trying to find monarch butterflies. And I found some around the corner from our house because the man who lived there is I would call him the godfather of monarch butterflies. In brisk morning. In brisk morning, bird song floats. Monarch butterfly dips and soars. Distant sounds rumble. In brisk morning, sunlight alive. My niece's partner sent Nellie and me books on how to write contemporary haiku, 3-line haikus. And I love the haikus where I don't have to count syllables. And so I wrote this 3-line poem about a monarch. Startled monarch flies away, walker stares. That was in August of 2021. And during this February, I wrote this. Milkweed leaves stretch skyward, swaying with slight breeze. Windmill monarchs deposit eggs so that orange butterflies color our neighborhood. My last nature poem is from the window series. So what I do when I get up in the morning, if I don't go outside to walk, I sit on one of the many windows many windows in our house, and I just look, and then pretty soon the objects and the elements talk to me. And so this is one that I wrote when I was either in my family room or in my living room. It is morning. Moistened leaves are ironed flat on drying spring. Tree branches curl like slithering snakes, loose leaves offer color: orange, red, goldenrod, lemon yellow, sepia brown. Calla lilies crumble inward. Time to be present for this moment. I'm a member of the Kaiser pain management program because I was diagnosed with an invisible disability 7 years ago. And one of the lessons that they teach us is to be present. And so I thank you today for your presence at my presentation. And I just hope that I'm able to present to you my presence as I read. My last poem is called As a Petal of Hope Takes Shape. It was selected by Diana Argerbright, the director and curator of the Euphrat Museum on De Anza College campus, to be used in an installation about hope. And what was so interesting is that De Anza, like all other college and university campuses in our country, was empty, was idle because of COVID regulations. And everything seemed so drab. So Diana came up with the idea of putting up the banners. And I just happened to send this poem to her just to show her what I had done. And she said, could I use this for the center of my installation? And I was so honored. So thank you, Diana. I hope that you're in the viewers audience. As a petal of hope takes shape. In brackish water, hope emerges from a cracked seed like the lotus. In search of light, hope wends itself, stretches toward illumination, waits to dance with dreams. As a petal of hope takes shape, it tastes like delectable kindness. It smells sweet like heartfelt compassion. It feels like golden silk stitch to goodness of humankind. Thank you for allowing me to share a sampling of the poems that I've written. I actually started writing poems when I was 9. I flirted with the idea of calling myself a poet from ages 9 to 82 to 75. And it was finally at the age of 75, I said, I'm going to go to heaven one day. And, and the fairy poet in heaven is going to ask me, well, did you do your job? And so if anything happens and I go meet her now, I can say, yes, I'm doing my job. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Flo.
Thank you, Flo.
You're welcome.
Flo, I will share the comments that are coming in from the side. A lot of love, a lot of support, beautiful, beautiful words that you have a lot of friends, fans, and admirers, and people who want to be like you. So we do have a couple questions coming in. So thank you so much, Flo. Thank you for taking the time. Again, the book that I know that you have, it's available on, I went on to Google, it's available at your favorite bookstore outlet. So please go there and pick it up. We have a first question. It's coming from Joanne Lynn. It says, Flo, thank you for your powerful poetry. What do you see as your role in fighting anti-Asian sentiments in our country, and what can we do to change the tide?
Ooh, my role, maybe writing what happens to people and what happened to myself on paper, and then reading it aloud. A poem is actually sort of complete when it's on paper, but it is even more complete when it's read and shared with an audience. And I wanted my voice to be heard, which is why I wrote the poems. I was so devastated when I was watching the TV broadcasts of these attacks on people, especially in Oakland, Chinatown. I saw 2 videos where they attacked people where I used to play, on the street where I used to play. And for me, that was a violation of my sacred spot, and I mean, how could they do something like that? And it was also always happening to a vulnerable, older Asian Chinese woman or man. And usually they didn't speak a lot of English. So they went out to, Chinatown to buy groceries or to go to a restaurant or whatever else. And I cried when I saw that one attack. And I said, my God, there for the grace of God, go I. And so I knew that I was vulnerable. And then what happened was that at the Millbrae cow train station, there was a homeless man who invaded my space, and I knew what was going to happen. I knew that if he came any closer, my body was going to be in harm. And I was in harm's way. Unbeknownst to me, my friends who dropped Ed and me off at the Caltrain station saw what was happening. They stayed because they knew to just watch over us. I'm so grateful to them for that wisdom. And so when I sat on that concrete seat by myself, and the homeless man just put his face in my face, I saw his green eyes. I mean, that's how close he was. So I thought, how do I break that contact? How do I not let him see my eyes? So I turned around and I leaned and looked down on the cement. As I looked down on the cement, I saw the tips of the sneakers my friend's husband was wearing, and I knew I was safe. And he happens to be a martial artist, and he's a fighter. So he comes out and he stands with his hands on his hips, and he just looks at the intruder to my body, and just snarled. And the homeless man just backed off, facing us, but backing off. And, no matter where I think I go and that I'm safe, I find out that I'm not safe. That's scary as hell. And I live in the suburbs, and we're pretty mild here in the suburbs, but nevertheless, psychological violence occurs all the time. So I think about, the elders in our major Chinatowns. I think about the elders who are living in, offshoots like Fremont or somewhere else. And, we just have to make sure that when they go out, they know that they have to be with someone, or we should be the ones to go with them. And, and my sister-in-law, who's a martial artist, wanted me to sign up for her martial arts class again. And, if I didn't live in Sunnyvale, I'd be there at her studio. But the safety is not just fear. It is what the fear does to our bodies and our minds and our hearts. It is corrosive. And Asian Americans and Chinese Americans have been in the US for the longest time. We have contributed so much to the building of this country. But because the idiotic president of long ago decided to use us as scapegoats because coronavirus started in China. I mean, he's the president of know nothing. So I hope I answered the question.
Thank you, Flo. Yeah, one of the things that when we were meeting with you before, is you were telling Joanne, who shared her story, to share stories, to write it down.
Yeah.
And what advice do you have, like, when we have these stories, who do we share it with, and how do we share it with, so it's accepted, so someone can actually garner the richness and the message?
I like your question, and let's see how I'm going to answer that. When we write a poem, at home, on the computer, on paper, or on the wall, or wherever, it's for us. And actually, the poets are the first audience for their poems. But when there's a social justice message, we have to find ways to find organizations like CATS or other groups to be able to put the word out publicly. I read at many other cities' poet laureate programs, and so I'm doing that. And I'm still going everywhere I can that will give me an invitation to read. I will read my anti-Asian violence poems, and just hope that some kind of charisma or something. I'm not sure if charisma is the right word, but this kind of energy floats out, because it's an energy to turn ill will into goodwill. And that's so important, that we recognize that there's so much ill will. We are in a divided country, plain and simple. And that's because the idiotic president decided to use us as scapegoats. I cannot believe that the power of the bully pulpit was used to bring harm to us. So, I have to be a woman warrior. I'm a warrior with words.
Thank you.
I wanted to thank you also, Flo. I really just met you yesterday, and we had such a nice conversation, and I feel like I've known you a long time just from our 1 hour and a half of chatting yesterday. So I look forward to finding out more about your work going forward. And I think one person asked, or I'm sure several people asked, what's next? What do you have coming up?
What's next? I belong to a group of poets, 3 of us, called the Last Hoisan Poets. And the group includes Jenny Lim, my sister Nellie, and then there's me. We are writing our poetry in English, but it is Hoisan words that we're using. And so on May 14th, come to San Francisco to J-Town. We are going to be performing and collaborating with the Del Sol String Quartet, the last Hoisan poets. And I am collaborating with Elena Gupta, whom I mentored when she was in the 3rd grade. She is a precocious, talented poet. And so my niece, Karen Weller, who was going to, she's going to move to Vancouver, Washington soon, but she's going to come home. And so I am teaching Elena and Karen a poem in Siyip, that Khoisan dialect. And Alina, in exchange, she is going to teach us a poem in Hindi. And we have our work cut out for us, but it's so much fun. I cannot believe it when I see Alina on Zoom and I give her the instructions or whatever. And then she recites it to me, because she's got it seems like she has photographic memory, and she just repeats everything to me. And I love being a teacher. I just love it. I don't care what age my students are. I love being a teacher, but I also love being the student. It is such a treasure to be the student, because then I move from competition to collaboration. And I would prefer a world in which we live where we collaborate rather than compete. But that's not the story of a capitalist, country.
That's great.
Flo, I think Ellen Fennick was wondering if the May 14th event is going to be streamed. Is it going to be on site, or is it going to be available online?
Or
both?
APIC, Asian Pacific Island, their cultural center in San Francisco, is the major sponsor. And so I will ask Andy Wong, who is the project director for our group, for Last Nights on Poets. And in fact, she's in the audience, and I don't know if she could answer in the chat, but I'm sure. But if I'm not, I'm sort of like, well, whatever, just combobulated right now. So I don't know quite what I'm saying.
Okay.
All right.
No problem. Well, maybe, Andy.
Oh, Andy answered. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah.
I believe Andy says, I believe their event will be streamed or at least recorded. So there will be an opportunity for everyone to hear it.
Yeah. And you get to hear Karen and me recite a part of a Hindi poem, and Alina reciting, a Chinese nursery rhyme.
Great. I think we'll be sending out an announcement of your upcoming events, right, Leanne?
Mhm.
So
Yes.
if everyone who registered will probably get a blast. So
Oh my
can-
gosh, I'm saying this because Melanie Herzog, who's a dear friend of mine in Wisconsin, she just put a chat into the chat box, and so wow.
There's so many nice comments, Flo. I'm going to
Okay.
read this one because I think it's really, I really like this one from PJ. Says, Dear Flo, thank you for showing us that your shining creative activism continually evolves and deepens the potential of our expression. Your words paint as powerfully as your visual art.
Oh, thank you. Wow.
Yeah.
And I have a confession to make. I do not have a degree in art. I just started making art and called myself an artist. And then when I went to Cal, I was a major in the English department, and I majored in Shakespeare. And the poetry that I write is really far from Shakespeare. They're not sonnets.
And then, I like this last one. Joanne says, fight on, woman warrior. Yeah.
Am I allowed to get tired?
Yes, you're human too. You're human too.
Okay. Thank you for letting me get tired.
We have allocated about an hour for the program. I don't think people are ready to say goodbye though. But we would like to close this program in a program and recording kind of way so people on Facebook can stop. But if anyone would like to join this after party, please raise your hand and we will let you in as a panelist. If you're interested, please raise your hand and we will let you in that way.
Yeah, that's a button on Zoom, right?
Right. It's I guess you could raise your hand or just say me. But I would like to thank you, Flo, for this incredible program and sharing your poetry that took us around the world. And Cats, on behalf of Cats, we're just so grateful to have this time with you and to share it with everybody else.
Thank you. And I really did it in memory of Jerry.
Oh, thank you.
He and I were on the Arts Council of Silicon Valley together, and he taught me so much of becoming even more of an active activist.
Excellent.